To the Anacortes City Council meeting of April 24th, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciak, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Cutter. Mr. Young.
Present.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton. Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Council members Moulton and Hubick let me know that they're not going to be able to be here tonight, so I move that their absence be excused.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. Young to excuse Ms. Hubick and Ms. Moulton. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
Of course, Mr. Carter would not be here tonight. Again, he's serving the country, and I move that we excuse his absence.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Young, second by Mr. McDougall to excuse Mr. Carter. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries, and yes, we do have a quorum still, and we will move on to Pledge of Allegiance. Would you join me in the pledge? Okay, we're on to item number 3, which is announcements and committee reports. First of all, I've got one announcement, a reminder, public service announcement. Ballots for the special election on the City of Anacortes request to raise the levy lid for public safety are due by 8 p.m. Tuesday, April 25th. That is tomorrow. In Anacortes, of course, ballots can be returned to drop boxes between Anacortes Public Library, behind the Anacortes Public Library at 2020 10th Street and the Skyline Beach Club at 6041 Sands Way. So again, tomorrow is due by 8 p.m., or they can be postmarked by tomorrow. But so that's a reminder there. The legislature came out of session today or yesterday, I think, and I think we've been working a lot. I know council has been working a lot on trying to help fill the gap of what we refer to as a Blake decision, and council thankfully passed the public drug use law as well in Anacortes, but the legislature has left us some work to do, but I think, Mr. Walters, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, earlier today I sent council a proposed ordinance that would adopt locally a prohibition on drug possession. In 2021, the state Supreme Court handed down a decision that said that you can't have a felony level drug possession statute that doesn't include a mens rea requirement, a knowledge requirement. So the legislature amended the statute to make drug possession a misdemeanor rather than a Class C felony, and to add a knowledge requirement. Now that statute is set to expire on July 1, or actually June 30th. And because the legislature went out of session yesterday without approving an extension of that expiring legislation, as of today, on July 1, unless the legislature takes action between now and July 1, drug possession will become legal in the state of Washington. Now, the legislature might be called into special session, they might reach agreement, they might figure out how to extend it, but in the situation where they don't, we have the option as City Council to adopt our own local drug possession statute. So what I forwarded council was basically picking up the existing statute that is expiring, making it a gross misdemeanor, and putting it into our code. I understand that the city police chiefs from Skagit County prosecutors, Skagit County sheriff are meeting tomorrow to talk about their proposed legislation to fix that. Ultimately, it's City Council's responsibility. So I circulated that ordinance for your consideration. Hopefully we put it on an agenda in the near future. I haven't heard from any legislators a whole lot of hope that they are going to fix this prior to July 1. And so if not, it's on us. We have some time, but I suggest that we move quickly to make it clear that, you know, if you voted against the bill that would have made drug possession a gross misdemeanor, well, we're going to make it a gross misdemeanor anyway, and so you don't really achieve the outcome that you want. I think it's a message to the legislature as much as taking control of what we can do here in Anacortes and making that happen. So I just put that out there. Check your email, you have it, and we'll talk about it more in the future, I guess, unless anybody would like to talk about it now.
And I appreciate that one of our 40th reps reached out to me just about an hour ago to let me know. I had already was following that and appreciate Mr. Walters immediately putting that up to council. The ask, I think, from the legislature, although it's kind of a hard ask since we're kind of taking the responsibility, is that we coordinated amongst the cities and jurisdictions. But again, I appreciate council leaning forward and filling the gap that the legislature was not able to accomplish. Maybe there is a slight chance for a special session, but seems pretty low probability.
Mayor,
Mr. Walters.
also forwarded that draft ordinance to county prosecutor, so he's got it as well for his meeting tomorrow. Again, it's copying the statute, so it's hopefully a pretty non-controversial model for how that could work, and maybe we could use that to move it forward countywide.
All right. Okay, so that was a add-on announcement. The next announcement and committee reports on my list is 3A, the Planning Committee. Mr. Walters.
Planning Committee met just before this meeting, Ms. Cleland McGrath and myself, and we talked largely about new state legislation regarding ADUs, missing middle housing, the various housing bills, and the ones that might implicate work for the city planning department. We had already proposed that we move forward with a housing options ordinance as part of implementation of our housing action plan, and the changes to the state legislation might modify that a little bit. So for example, one of the things that the new legislation does is prohibit local jurisdictions from enacting an owner occupancy requirement for ADUs. We currently have such a requirement, so we'll need to repeal that. Theoretically, we don't need to repeal that until 6 months or so after the periodic comprehensive plan update, but we could also get it done sooner. So we advocated that we move forward on our housing options ordinance, which we think would be fairly brief, a fairly easy list of more or less non-controversial items that can be moved forward without a lot of work having to spend drafting new code, but could have some significant effect on missing middle housing. Is anything? Okay.
Ms. Cleland.
Yeah, hacks wasn't included on here, but we had some not at our normal time meetings. So on April 18th, we had a roundtable discussion with really trying to focus on our outreach team for those folks that are unhoused and how we interact with them. So we had Helping Hands present, we had Community Action present, we had Family Center present, and then we also had our outreach team that's kind of city folks. And we really kind of talked about building trust, making sure we have clear goals, what our expectations are for the team, and how what each provider brings to the table, and making sure we're not duplicating services and undermining, and really looking for our deliverables. So what we came around to is that we need to have a couple more meetings to really be really clear, eyeball to eyeball, and figure out what our expectations are. So that was a good meeting. And then also the next day we had a meeting with Skagit Legal Aid, Andy Dugan, who is in charge of that, with a couple of staff members and our city attorney, and just kind of talked about how Skagit Legal Aid is available for community members, their connections with either volunteer with attorneys that are local to Anacortes, and the types of folks that they are serving. They are now going to be able to have space out of the Family Center building, their new admin building, to have regular meetings with folks who need, either a lot of things is about tenant issues, wills, etc., medical debt collections, things like that, and just trying to help folks that don't have the the means to get private representation. So it was a really nice meeting to have him on board and have another connection with our community.
Great, thank you. All right, any other announcements or committee reports before I move on to what I have as a proclamation? Okay, next up, 3B, Arbor Day Proclamation. City of Anacortes Proclamation, Arbor Day, April 28th, 2023. Whereas Arbor Day means tree in Latin, Arbor Day is a special day that has been set aside for planting and caring for trees, and whereas a secular day of observance in which individuals and groups are encouraged to plant trees, whereas all 50 states and many countries throughout the world celebrate this holiday every spring to teach children the importance of forestry, and whereas Anacortes has been recognized by the National Arbor Day Foundation as a Tree City USA for the 21st consecutive year, and whereas the tree planting this year will be held at Causland Park Friday, April 28th, 2023, 10 a.m. to help improve our urban forest. Now, therefore, be it resolved as a fitting and appropriate tribute that I, Matt Miller, Mayor of the City of Anacortes, do hereby proclaim Friday, April 28th, 2023 as our celebration of Arbor Day in Anacortes and encourage our citizens to plant trees, thus leaving a legacy for present and future generations. All right, on to item number 4. This is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address City Council on anything that is not on our agenda, and we have just contracts on the agenda and a finance update. So if you want to talk to council about something besides the first quarter finance update, now is your time to address the council. I don't have anybody signed up, but yeah, come on up. And so just state your name and where you live. You don't have to give your address, but the city helps. And can you make sure the microphone is on with the blue light or green light?
My name is Mark Robinson. I live in Everett, Washington.
Okay.
I'm here representing Spencer Beach, who owns property over at 1907 K Way in Anacortes. And I want to thank Mayor Miller for giving me a call a couple of hours ago. Sorry if I fumbled my answering that, but I didn't expect you to call me while I was driving in my car, just to, I think, help level set my expectations for what's going to come out of this discussion. Back in October of 2020, Mr. Beach bought the property at 1907 K Way. About 2 days later, Dan Simmons, who owns the property at 1909 K Way next door, applied for permit to replace an existing fence with a newer one, longer and taller, which is certainly his right. The city issued that permit a couple of days later with the caveats explicitly put in writing in the permit that the owner of 1909 K Way was responsible to make sure that fence was located on his property. 2 different places. The fence was built by a contractor out of Mount Vernon, never requested a final inspection of that fence's installation. When I came in and talked to Rob down in the planning department about a month ago about the location of it, he looked things up, sent the inspector out to look at the fence. The fence was indeed over on on Spencer Beach's property. They submitted a notice of violation to Dan Simmons on the 9th of March. The response to that notice of violation told him you got to move the fence back on your property. The response was from Mr. Simmons' lawyer, Craig Seastrom, I guess, that basically said, nope, we don't have to because we're claiming that land of ours as ours by right of adverse possession. All of my research, all of the research that the planning department can make indicates that there's been no filing legally of that adverse possession claim anywhere, either in the state, in this county, or in the city's records. So I met with the city attorney briefly, just walked into her office. She was kind enough to allow me to just come on in and bug her, and requested that they continue to pursue this notice of violation and have the fence removed. Or alternate to that, at least recognize that the fence was in fact on the property that Mr. Beach owns and that it is in fact his property, so he can do whatever he wants to with it. We urge the council and the mayor to continue down that road, either have him move the fence, and we realize that's probably a difficult thing to do, or recognize that, in fact, Mr. Beach does own that property and does own that fence by legal right, and we'll have it removed. Either way, we're happy with that. So,
Okay.
thanks for your time.
Thank you.
5
Appreciate it.
seconds early.
Anybody else want to address the council on anything that's not on the agenda? Participants online. Sorry, almost forgot to check. Oh, yeah. Okay, we are moving on to our consent agenda, items 5A, B, and C.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Young.
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Okay, motion by Mr. Young, a second by Ms. Cleland McGrath to approve consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. We are on to other business. Item 6A, it's a contract award, 2023 sanitary sewer line rehabilitation. It's a discussion item with possible action, and Mr. Hash, I'm sure, will be here shortly to answer any questions about any material you saw in the packet.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Council, and the audience. Henry Hash, Public Works Department. We have 4 contract items before you tonight. One is in the consent and the other one. These are really routine, everyday things that we need to do in public works in order to maintain our streets, sidewalks, in this and sewer treatment plant. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. If you don't have the information, I can help you with that.
Yeah, so we will take them one at a time. So if you have any questions about the sanitary sewer line rehabilitation, we'll start with that one first, and if council wants to take action.
Yes, sir.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
We reviewed this in Public Works Committee last week, so most of us here are familiar with it. Do you want to put the map up for the benefit of the public?
I can't do the map up, but I can give you a copy.
I have it, but if you're not going to do that, then that's fine.
That's in Storvik area, Storvik Park.
Mr. McDougall, were you going to try to share that?
Yeah, I'll see if I can do a share screen and put it up for folks. All right, is that up?
Yeah, look at that.
That's it. Thank you.
All right.
You bet.
Thank you. I just think it's worthwhile explaining to folks the scope of the maintenance that we need to do on an ongoing basis to keep our infrastructure, including and especially our sewer lines, functional, and also give them a little bit of a heads up where they're going to be seeing machinery.
Appreciate that. Thank you. This is a problem that exists from all the sewer systems throughout the country. The biggest problem we have is I&I, inflow and infiltration. Basically, we get stormwater in our sewer system, and we need to treat that. Our sewer system is designed for about 3.5 million gallons a day, which generally we get less. But when we have lots of rain, we get up to 10, 11 million gallons a day. This is a requirement. Slowly but surely, we need to work on them to eventually reduce it.
And this will largely be the cast-in-place pipe. You want to describe that for folks?
Certainly. This is called the sleep lining. Basically, we don't need to excavate the road or take out the pipe or replace the pipe. They're going to put a liner through the pipe, which makes a new pipe, which should last, the claim is, as long as the original pipe was supposed to last. This is a very good system. I mean, imagine in bigger downtown San Francisco and Chicago if they want to excavate in downtown. So this is the method used all over the country, yes. The The bid price came a bit higher than the engineering estimate, but still within the range that we like to see. We like to see within 15% of engineering estimate. In this case, you take the tax out, is about 12% higher, and simply because of the cost of material has gone up so much. We had 4 contracts, 4 bids on this, and the other 3 were considerably higher. So this is a good bid.
All right, any other questions, motions?
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Young?
I move that the city authorize the mayor to sign the contract, I think it's 23-067-SEW-001 with Iron Horse LLC in the amount of $465,474.69 for the 2022-2023 sanitary sewer line rehabilitation project.
Second.
All right, Mr. Walters just edged you out, so a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. Walters to approve the contract 23067 SEW001 as presented. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, take the vote, please.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, next up, 6B, contract award. This is a 2023 asphalt overlay project. And I wonder if Mr. McDougall will also pull up that
Yeah,
map.
sure thing.
Yeah, you're helping out Mr. Hash. This is a team effort. It's great. I love it.
Thank you. However, those roads are listed on the council agenda.
All right, questions for Mr. Hash? Or
If I
you want,
may,
yeah, please, go ahead.
yeah, Mr. Mayor, really, our thanks and appreciation probably goes to Mayor and Council for giving us good amount of money for this year. We have a very, very good and ambitious program. We are going to do a lot of chip sealing and asphalt overlay, and this is the first one. The chip sealing bid should go out in a matter of days. This bid came out very, very favorable. Our engineering estimate was about $950, and this came at about $753,000. And the roads to be done, I guess it is on the map, but Skyline Way, Sands Way, Sandra Court, Curtis Court, Lee Place, and Parkside Drive.
Mr. Walters.
This is going to be a great project for this neighborhood, and this is the project that didn't get done last year because we were doing the underlying work.
Yes.
The price, even though it is a good price associated with this particular project, is illustrative of the fact that it just costs so much to rehab these roads. And so we reviewed this project in the Public Works Committee. I think it looks great. Public Works Committee, I think, agreed. But we have talked at length about a need for a real plan for how we can get to all the rest of the roads in town. And what does that look like? What does that cost? How do we reduce those costs? How do we manage those expectations, legitimate ones that people have for their street in front of their house and their street on the way to their house also getting rehab work? So just use this opportunity to put in another pitch for that planning level effort. But this project by itself looks good, and in my opinion is good to go.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
I just want to echo what Mr. Walters said. I really appreciate the Public Works Department in its effort to, one, contain costs, but two, to maximize the utility that we're getting as a city for those dollars that we're choosing to spend. I really appreciate that. We discussed this and other strategies for our road in committee quite a bit. You know, we go back and forth, meaning in discussion, just to try to figure out what's the best option. Is this money that we're choosing to spend now, how long will it last before we have to come back? And given the state of the roads that we're trying to keep here in the city, I think that Mr. Hash, as well as the team, presented a really good argument for this strategy that we are applying right now. And I appreciate that, and I wanted to sort of acknowledge that publicly, because we really did go over and look at what are the best ways that we can do it, because everybody's needing something a little different based upon the composition of their roads. And so I really appreciate that. And to the second point that Mr. Walter made about ensuring that we reach as many people as we can, it's hard with the resources we have, and that was another discussion we had in the meeting, of course. But, the point is that we're trying to get to as many people as possible. We've not forgotten those streets that are in need of a little bit more repair. And so all of that's on the table. And now, given the discussions of the budget that we've put into place and ensuring that it's going for those things that we deem important for the roads, I really appreciate where we're going with this. And I just really overall wanted to acknowledge my support of this, but also acknowledge the hard work that's happening within the department, that even within the department, we have employees that are taking on jobs to save the city money. And I don't think we talk as much about that as I think it's important that we do. And, I'm going to take every opportunity I get to acknowledge that, because I know there are a number of instances and times where employees have stepped up beyond their normal duties to take on jobs that may have ordinarily gone to a contract. And we save the city money. So it's a good thing. Thank you. Unless there's something else, is there anything, Ms. Cleland McGrath or Mr. McDougall? Then I move that the city authorize the mayor to sign contract 22-291-TRN-001 with Lakeside Industries, Inc. in the amount of $753,185.85 to perform the 2023 asphalt overlay.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Mr. Walters to approve contract 22-291-TRN-001 as presented. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, take the vote, please.
Mr. Walters? Yes. Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, next up, 6C, contract award sidewalk infrastructure improvements, 22174 TRN 001. Mr. Hash, and look at that, Mr. McDougall's already on top of it. And I believe, Mr. Walters, your comments are the same about trying to. I know Mr. Hash and his team are working hard to figure out the priority scheme for both streets and sidewalks. But any questions for Mr. Hash?
Mayor Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may,
go ahead.
this really was a condition that was given to Public Works and Parks Department as a result of some improvement. So although this is a sidewalk project, doesn't necessarily fall into our sidewalk improvement.
Thank you. That's a good point. Correcting me on this is not part of the priority plan. It was a condition of the project.
Yes, sir, and it's a good bit.
Mr. Walters.
So one question. First of all, what are the red stars? What do they represent? The red lines indicate where sidewalk is going, right? But what do the red stars represent on this map?
I don't want to give you the incorrect answer, Councilman Walters, but I will give it to you first thing in the morning. I know the red line is the extent of the sidewalk, but those stars, I am not sure what they mean. I should, but I don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Didn't mean to stump you, but
I'll give it back to
the
you.
red lines, I think, are pretty clear as to where the sidewalk is going.
Yes.
One thing that we talked about in the Public Works Committee review of this is There is a bit of sidewalk just south of the southernmost red line, south of the new reservoirs, that is missing. There's some missing sidewalk before it gets to Haddon. And so we'd inquired about that. That's not simply the city not building that section of sidewalk. We don't own the right-of-way
Correct.
that is necessary to build that last bit of sidewalk. So
Yes.
if the property there ever develops, they will put in a sidewalk, and then we will have that connection. But in the meantime, you know, we can build other connections like the one across Whistle there, and figure out how to proceed. So I know that that has come up among my constituents a couple of times, so I mention it for that purpose. Otherwise, I'm glad to see us moving forward on this and finishing off that project, the cemetery project. Mayor Miller, I move approval of the contract as presented.
Second.
So I got a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Mr. McDougall because you didn't get your light turned on, so I'm not. To approve contract 22-174 TRN 001 as presented. Any additional discussion?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
Well, one more thing. So we ought to have an ongoing rolling 6-year plan for transportation improvements and
Yes.
sidewalks as
Yes.
part of this. But in 2 years, we are going to need to update the comprehensive plan with a 20-year plan. And so at a minimum, that ought to be what we are working towards. And in my view, these one-off projects are great because they are actually making a difference on the ground. They're getting it done. But we have to have a holistic view. And there's no time like the comprehensive plan update due July 1, 2025 for us to make that happen. So I hope that we're setting our sights that way.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank Councilman McDougall for helping me in with his high-tech skills.
Very welcome. Glad to do it.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. And Mr. Franciac, would you take the vote, please?
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters. Motion carries.
Okay, thanks. Last item on our agenda is item 6D, which is a first quarter finance update. This is a discussion item only and open for public comment. Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. I did make a couple of slight adjustments to a couple of these slides tonight, and presenting in the Excel format, it's, I think, a little easier to present, and I'd be happy to forward this to anybody that would want it in the Excel format. But this is through first quarter, just the first 3 months of the year, and just the broadly, both revenues and expenditures are meeting expectations at this time. And I'll just go through pretty quickly through these charts that I think everybody is familiar with, the same ones that we've shown in the past. But through March, we're 25% through the year, so that was kind of our metric of status. And you'll see property taxes, the majority of those revenues come in 2 tranches during the year, in May and November. That's why this level is so low at this point. But even aside from that, overall, the rest of these revenue streams are pretty much meeting expectations. And all of our major revenue streams totaling out at 18.3% at this point. Sales tax is one of our most important revenue streams, and apologize. One of our largest tax revenue streams and most important revenue streams. And at this point, we are 1.7% over budget, so what we have expected to collect in terms of revenue so far this year, we're exceeding it by 1.7%. Looking at, and you see this is a little bit different than what was included in the council packet. I tried to change the stacked area charts to line charts. they were a little bit hard to look at. But looking at the last several years' history, this is a January through March collection in years 2017 through 2023, and you can see how we've got a really nice escalating collection through that period year over year. Private utility tax, so as a reminder, our utility tax in total we collect on both the private utilities, which are natural gas, electricity, phone service, and cable TV. That's the private utility tax. And then we also collect it on the public utilities, which are the city's utilities. So we're exceeding budget by 6.6% so far this year. And dropping down to the historical view, you can see this is the first time last year and this year, the first years in quite some time that revenue stream has actually increased. So thanks to the increased electricity cost and natural gas costs, it's bad for the consumer, but it's good for us in terms of utility tax collection. The public utility tax, which is, again, the utility tax collected against the public, the city's utilities, is running a little bit below what our expectations, So this is due to a couple of things. So there's been shutdowns at both refineries this year, which has significantly reduced the amount of water that the refineries are using. So that's affected the amount of utility tax that we've collected. But there's also been a general shift in consumption over the last couple of years. So due to COVID, the refineries use much less water. The refineries, traditionally have used 68 to 70% of the water that the city produces, and that's starting to come back. But both of those things have come into play in the utility tax collection this year. So I would expect to see that come back and normalize throughout the year, but it is something we'll continue to keep an eye on. And the utility tax total, this is just a combination of these two revenue streams. So you can see the total impact of that revenue stream is nearly $5 million. It's a very significant revenue stream for us, and overall trending about 2.5% below expectation, primarily because of the decreased public utility tax collection so far, but still pretty close to average. And looking at the total collection historically, we're right there where we want to be. Looking at building revenues, there's a lot of material on this chart, so I'll kind of go through it a little bit at a time. So through March, I wanted to show the comparison to the last few years of the building permit. These are building permits that have been issued through March. So in total, first quarter 2023, we've issued 9 permits compared to the last 2 years at 18, and then 2020 at 15. So that building permit issuance has been down a little bit. Looking at the revenues have not yet been impacted. This chart right here, this line bar chart, is just looking at total revenues by year. So dropping down to this matrix here in the blue font, you can see what we've collected in terms of building permit revenue through first quarter the last several years, going back to 2016. So about the same as what we've collected in both 2021 and 2022.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
For building permits, I wonder if we might consider some modifications to what we report on here, because if we were building all single-family residences, they more or less correlate with permits. But we now require fence permits, which is a $15 minor permit, but it might be counted in these statistics, and that would tend to throw it. I wonder if we should instead be tracking dwelling units permitted, because that gets at our housing goals. but also because impact fees, connection fee, those types of things, unless they're an ADU, are associated with dwelling units, so it might be a more valuable metric. And maybe more thought than that should go into it as well. But I just wonder if, especially as we talk about more multifamily and more missing middle housing, if the value of just the number of building permits as the metric goes down, and of more significant value is number of permitted or constructed dwelling units.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I'd be happy to take a look at that. Maybe we can talk about that even more at the committee level.
And I know that the planning department is generating those statistics already, so it might be a conservation of effort thing too as well.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
Yeah, just to follow up on Mr. Walters. No, I agree. I think that would be something that would be very helpful, at least informative for us to gauge where we are. Do you have any sort of wisdom in your crystal ball as to why they might be down? Is it interest rates? Is it uncertainty of the markets? Just to elaborate just a little bit on why we are here and having this discussion about that number.
Yeah, direct correlation to the interest rates, increase in interest rates. We'll look at REIT here in a little bit, and we can see in the existing housing market, so building permits generate revenue for us when they're built the first time. Real estate excise taxes generated on those existing homes that are sold, and we'll see in both those categories the amount of activity is dramatically decreased from the previous years. So on this chart, I do have this broken out between single family, multifamily, and commercial for the number of permits issued. But there were, I guess I want to make sure I'm understanding the
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to, because these are all apples to apples. This is all March of 2022, March of 2021, apples to apples comparison, right? And
that's right, for this data here is all
and then
through
down
March
at the
for those
bottom, you
years.
have another, there's some more data about what types of permits. Yeah, I also want to capture what Mr. Walters was, make sure we're providing the right data. But Mr. Walters?
Yeah, and so like multifamily 1 was permitted. That could be a 50-unit building or a 1, or a 4-unit building. So
I see what you're saying.
So maybe we can add,
Yeah.
do a little carrot with some details of what type of permit that is.
Yeah, good idea. Next category of impact fees. This is just so related to the number of building permits. Oh, I forgot to, I apologize. I meant to put in that first quarter comparison revenue, but collected 51,000 so far in 2023. Same period last year was 146,000. 2021, 69,000.
You're
click
making
back
that.
on Excel.
I don't know what to click
No,
to make
back
this
on
go
Excel,
away.
on the off there. Nope. Click, there you go.
Gee, sorry about that. First quarter 2020 was 41,000. So you can see the amount of impact fees collected so far in the first quarter is fairly consistent with what we've done in previous years as well. Real estate.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters?
So also, as we move toward more multifamily, the amount of impact fees might start to change as distributed amongst the various fees. So I wonder if we might get that breakdown in these figures somehow, or in the chart. I mean, you've got them below the cash balance of streets, parks, and fire, and that's very helpful. But yeah, it's a bar chart. If it were a stacked bar and it had parks, streets, and fire,
right.
then we'd have that additional information, and it would look basically the same.
Yeah, good. I like it.
Yeah, because those are commingled. Each one of those boxes are commingled, say March of 2023. That's commingled of potentially all of those 3 impact fees.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
sometimes 0 of, like, the fire impact fee if it's not more than a 3-story building.
Yep, good idea. The real estate excise tax collection. So looking at, on this row, the revenue collection through March, going back to 2016, slightly up over last year and significantly up over earlier years. I did include a little more information in this chart than I have in the past on the use of impact fees. I know there's a lot here, but looking at this row, this is the cash balance at the end of March for both REIT 1 and REIT 2. Again, REIT 2 is more restrictive than REIT 1. We generally try to use our more restrictive cash first, and that's why the REIT 2 balance is lower than REIT 1. But at the end of the month, the end of March, about $4.3 million in the bank as far as combined REIT 1 and REIT 2, estimating remaining $956,000 in total collections for the year, and this is just looking at what we collected last year, April through December, and then what we have budgeted for REIT use this year. So that is projecting out, based on those metrics, ending balance of just under $3.6 million. So the 1.7 that we have budgeted for use so far, it's all in REIT 1 this year. And this is the allocation of that REIT 1 budget. Okay. This REIT per transaction, this is what I was referring to earlier about the impact of the interest rates on the real estate activity. So you can see the amount of revenue that we've collected first quarter each of those years going back to 2016. And this is the number of home sales during those same periods going back to 2016 that generated that amount of revenue. So this year, there's been 71 home sales. Last year, the same time frame, 68. We've collected about the same amount of money for both those periods, and that works out to $4,241 per transaction. And this year, $4,100 last year. Going back to 2021, through first quarter, we had seen 114 home sales generating $280,000 or $2,463 per transaction. And then you can see the history there. It's the amount of REIT is based on the amount of the home sale. Home sales are higher now than they've been in the past, and that's what's generating that additional revenue, or that level of revenue. So we haven't seen the impact in our revenues yet of those high interest rates, but we can see the number of transactions has decreased. Lodging tax continues to be strong. You can see 86,000, nearly 87,000 collected through March. Looking back historically, it's significantly higher than any first quarter we've had the last, since we've been tracking this information. This is just the broad look at each of our funds, the revenues versus expenditures, budget versus actual. So the way this is laid out, under the fund, the first row is revenues, column G is budget, column H is actuals, and then the difference between budget and actual expenditures and revenues. And then over on the right-hand column here, I put down the ending cash balance for the end of the year. This is 12/31/22. It's apples and oranges a little bit, but I wanted to illustrate what that ending cash balance was at the end of the year for each of these funds. That's the snapshot that we report on our annual report. It's the snapshot that our budget compliance is measured against. So I thought this might make sense. And I'm happy to hear any feedback you would have on that. Another thing, too, is looking at the cash balance in our funds that rely heavily on property tax. It looks a little wonky in those months between the property tax revenues. So this gives a kind of an apples-to-apples comparison across the funds. And I did break out the general fund cash. We have three primary cash balances that we hold within the general fund. The regular operating cash has a balance of $2,097,000. Our rainy day fund is at $4.5 million. And the cash that we have set aside for future computer purchases, the DIS, Department of Information Services, that department resides within the general fund. So those future computer purchases, those cash collections that we have on hand, we set those aside in a separate fund as well in the general fund. Looking,
Miller.
Mr. Walters.
In terms of the format here, I think generally it probably makes sense to show us the end of year cash balance to smooth out some of those things you were talking about. It probably also makes sense to note here for each fund how much of the reserves we have budgeted to spend in this budget year. And then maybe also the requirement. So for instance, we have a fund emergency revenue policy, make sure that we have a certain amount of money in each fund to cover its expenses, right? So if that calculation were done and placed next to this, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
And then I also appreciate the inclusion of the information systems, the DIS data. I do think that going into the next budget, we're going to need more visibility into that and ER&R so that we know we have these future liabilities and we're collecting this much revenue to cover those liabilities, or that we're not and we're at the 75% level or whatever over time, not just the 1 year, so that we can make intelligent decisions about how much we should be putting into those funds.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's good feedback. I appreciate that. Thinking through, particularly on the use of cash reserves to balance the budget, that's not readily available unless you dig into the OpenGov database, and that'd be easy to include in these charts. So looking down through, again, 25% is our metric of process through the year, 1 quarter through the year. So all things being equal, you'd expect to see revenues and expenditures being close to that 25% level. We're hitting it right on the money. And our expenditure stream in the general fund, revenues were a little bit under. We do rely on property tax to some level in the general fund. We also have some debt built into our resources in the general fund, so that's why that's not at that 25% level. Parks is one of the funds that relies heavily on property tax, so the revenues are well under that 25% metric, but expenditures right there. Cemeteries and other ones heavily reliant on property tax, but you can see the expenditures near that 25% mark. Same with library. Street maintenance. Street maintenance is one of those funds that we do rely on cash reserves. This year it has you can see at the end of the year balance was 1.2 million, so we are going to be drawing that down somewhat during the year, but also there may be some room, a little bit of wiggle room for additional overlays this year because of that cash balance as well. But dropping down through, I'll point this out, Washington Park revenue at 34%. Once that period opens up where people can make reservations for their camping spots, that's why the revenue stream was higher there. There was a big influx of reservations. Just dropping down to see if anything looks unusual or jumps out at us. These are the cash balances for impact fees by type. The ACFL fund, the majority of its budget now is reliant on cash reserves. The agreement for harvesting rock out of the quarry is expired now, so for the time being, most of those revenues will be cash reserves, but it does have a healthy balance, $577,000. Lodging tax, we talked about, a healthy balance of $1.4 million. REIT we talked about. So getting down into the 400 level funds are the enterprise funds, the utilities. I In addition to total revenues, I have the charges for service broken out here because particularly the water fund, but sewer and storm as well, have revenues that are restricted for capital use. So the charges for service are essentially the operating revenues that we're collecting. Additional revenues are going to be restricted for capital. So total revenues of 4.8 million collected so far in the water fund. 3 million of those were charges for service. So about 1.8 million of that is collected from our customers, both from our regional customers for capital use, also as part of general facilities charges when somebody buys a building permit. Those are coded as capital as well. The different elements of the cash balance in the water fund are listed here. So the operating cash, 23 million, rainy day fund is 1.3, and then other capital monies at 7.2 million. Sewer fund, also a large capital reserve in the sewer fund. Healthy operating fund. Storm drain, collected 526,000. Most of that is regular operating cash, a small amount of it capital. You can see at the end of the year for the storm drain fund, about 7,300 was restricted for capital, 192,000 restricted for rainy day fund. Sanitation, healthy balance, and then the equipment rental fund, this 8.8 million in capital, so this is what has been set aside for future equipment replacement, and $1,077,000 in operating cash. So I went through all of that pretty quickly. I know there's a lot there. I'd be happy to revisit any of that, or if there's any questions on any of those funds.
Well, maybe make sure that if any member of the public, yes, I see a hand up, and you got to come on up to the microphone and state your name and where you live. That's part of the deal. But it's okay. We'll be nice to you. Yep, but we got to get it on record.
My name is Phyllis Hainan. I live out in the Portales neighborhood, and I was just wondering if our speaker could define the distinction between REIT 1 and REIT 2. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, REIT 1 and REIT 2. So when a home is sold, it's an excise tax that's collected against the sale of the home, distributed to the city for public works use. And there's the distinctions between the two. They're both available for public works use. Generally, what you think of as a public works, roads, parks, anything of that nature, are eligible. REIT 1 is more restrictive. REIT 2 is more, oh boy, sorry. One of them is more restrictive. I think it's REIT 2 is more restrictive, and it doesn't have as much flexibility to be used for parks or to be used for municipal buildings. So when we have REIT use for the facilities, that comes out of REIT 1 because it's less restrictive. So administrative buildings, public safety buildings, parks, those have more restrictions. So we use REIT 1 for those projects, and REIT 2 is more restrictive. So we generally use those for the road projects, things of that nature, where they don't have those restrictions.
I've been trying for many years to have some sort of mnemonic to remember which one's more restrictive than the other one, and I can't either. So.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
I have in my notes here, and I'll send you an email as well, but maybe it would be helpful for us, and as well as the viewing public, to have on each page that talks about revenue streams, a fairly simple statement of what those revenue streams can be spent on. So for example, we've got $1.4 million in reserve for lodging tax, but we can only spend that on events and public facilities, you know, so similarly, REIT, obviously, building permit revenue, it's not general revenue, even though it's in the general fund, so it can't be spent just on anything. So a statement, maybe including citations, that highlights that for the benefit of council, but also for the benefit of the public, I think would be pretty useful.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this feedback. It's easy to just get used to seeing the same things month after month and take a lot of it for granted. So it'd be easy to come up with that information, plug it into these charts, so it's available for everybody. Yeah. Okay, so moving on, I broke out the different revenue streams, the primary categories. This is just in the general fund. You can see taxes overall, we're at 12.8 million of our general fund budget is taxes, which is nearly 45%. We've collected about 22.7%, so part of that is property tax that we talked about earlier and utility tax that are both under a little bit at this point in the year. 28.7% total collection in licenses and permits. It's right on target. Our shared revenues from the state are at 32.5%. This is also where we identify the rebate we get from the county. So this goes back to the original interlocal agreement, the 3/10 public safety sales tax that the voters approved a number of years ago. All of the county and all of the cities in the county interlocal to build and fund the new jail. As part of that agreement, City of Anacortes, in recognition of the additional sales tax that it contributes against the lower amount of expenditures that it generates, we get a refund back from that sales tax. So we budgeted $158,000. When I come back with second quarter update, you'll see that number, or the actual charges for services. The majority of this is in the fire department. That's at 19.1% so far this year, but as we continue to hook customers up, that'll continue to grow. So we are projecting out through the end of the year, we're still on target to hit that 1.8 million. A lot of minor revenue streams here. This is this contributed capital line. This is the grant revenue that we're anticipating for the fire department. Our accruals for overhead, DIS department. And then this is where we have categorized the debt that we have budgeted. So there's both the fire department and the fire department for the ladder truck that we have budgeted to take on debt. We also have a transfer of REIT budgeted for the facilities department there as well. Looking at the general fund expenditures, this is just by department, dropping down through. Everything is pretty consistent. You'll see a couple of areas that are a little bit over. DIS is one from the purchase of computers that it does early in the year that it distributes out through the replacement program. There's a lot of, pardon me, a lot of departments that have subscriptions early in the year that drive up some of these beyond that 25% mark. This is the spreadsheet that I use to keep track of capital. If this is useful for council, I can continue to provide it. Column B is the fund number. The road maintenance program is Fund 104. Column C is where I have the description of the program, the cost, and then the different funding sources. So grants, impact fees. So we have $784,000 budgeted in impact fees for the R Avenue Improvement Project. And then, as we mentioned earlier, REIT 1 for a number of capital projects this year. I do have this color-coded, this magenta highlight of this program at $5.3 million. If you drop down to the bottom of the chart, these different categories here sum up to that 5.3 million. So the impact fees and then 3 different grants identified to make up the balance of resources for that project. Well, that's what I have for you tonight. Happy to answer any other questions or any other thoughts that council might have.
And again, before I turn it over to council, any member of the public want to ask any questions? Okay, council, any other questions for Mr. Hoagland?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. McDougall?
I actually had a question, Mr. Hoagland. Going back to that, the real estate excise tax numbers slide that you had where year on year, and there was like 68 sales for this time period and X dollars. Yeah, that
This
one.
one?
That, yeah. So basically, like, we see a big jump from 2021 to 2022, and roughly that 22 to 23, the numbers roughly carry over. Is that number? You said it was tied to like the overall like unit price sale. Is that a fixed number such that like it looks like it jumped 50% or it took a giant jump? Did the average home sales price jump by essentially the corresponding percentage, or is it more of a sliding scale?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So it's 0.25% that are charged on the sale of a home for REIT 1 and REIT 2. So it's a product of the change in the average cost of a house sale.
Okay. And a house sale, would a like say a condominium sale have the exact same thing? Presumably it's it's a lower total cost of sale
Yeah.
than a home, same tax.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and actually, I appreciate you bringing that up. So that would not be captured here. The way we track this, I guess I'm using the term house sale a little bit loosely because what we're tracking is when a utility account changes hands. So if it's a condominium that's sold and the building just has one water meter, we wouldn't catch that here. So there are, maybe a little bit of some generalities taken in this information.
Okay.
Ms.
I
Cle-
guess largely. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mr. McDougall, and then Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
I was just curious if it had anything to do with the refinancing and the interest rates, right? We saw a lot of refinancing happening in 2019 and 2020, and then as interest rates started to go up in 2022, that dropped down. I was wondering if that had anything to do with the 114, right?
Yeah. No,
So that was not factored in.
Right,
Okay.
no. So this is just when accounts change hands. So yeah, when a home is sold in the city of Anacortes, the account stays with the house. So when there's a new owner in the house, then that's what we're capturing here.
Is there anything else, Mr. McDougall? Did you have?
No, thanks. I'm good.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you for that update, Mr. Hoagland. And with no further agenda items, I will adjourn tonight's council meeting. Thank you.